So to elaborate on what I discussed in my last video, um, an important key point to keep in mind as you're starting off as a creative writer, which I wish I'd known sooner, is something that I'm sure you've heard a lot of people mention in many different fields of study and different career paths, which is finding your own niche of research. Um, and in my case, it was social engineering, incorporating historical and political and sometimes philosophical things that I was interested in into my writing, which ties into what actually I explained in my last video about keeping the social, historical, and political context in mind, and that helping you create a message for a story. And in my case, that prevented my messages from being a little bit too much like a kind of like a Hallmark greeting card, like, oh, just war is bad, and peace on earth, or whatever. I mean, to avoid those platitudes, avoiding things like that, it always helped me to get very specific about everything, about what kinds of things informed the character's choices, the character's viewpoint. um, and But I'm not saying you necessarily have to restrict your story or your writing to these things. I mean, any kind of research is fine as long as it serves you in some way. um, And other things are certain technicalities that I wish I had known, which are story arc and plot. And the story arc usually starts with the exposition, introducing the characters, the circumstances, sometimes the objective, but that also varies depending on whether or not there's how many twists that there are in the story. Sometimes things can start off as the character having a very ordinary life, or a very um, sometimes inactive or boring life, but some inciting incident, something happens that triggers that can create an objective, which brings me to the next stage in the story arc, which is the rising action, which can indeed either be something that creates an entirely new and life-changing or earth-shattering type of experience for the character, or can simply be the character coming to terms with something on his own and finally pursuing an objective, or whether that's falling in love with another character, or desire for vengeance. I mean, you see different kinds of examples of this. And the denouement is the when finally everything comes to a head, and there's a sense of uncertainty or a sense of excitement. You don't know what the final outcome will be, whether it's through a conflict, um, or a kind of a gripping, very pithy moment right before the character might either succeed or fail. And it's the most important, most crucial moment in the story. And then the falling action sometimes can overlap with the conclusion. Um, whether it has to do with the character having to, whether the character's triumph, let's say, or failure causes them to reflect on their own life, their own experiences, in which case those two things can sometimes be uh, years apart. You might see stories where they succeed, and then years down the road they're reflecting on their life, and they're much older, and they're talking about how they wish they could have done something differently. Or sometimes the mere triumph, the failure, is what is really how the character or how the story will end. Um, and The plot is more to do with how the story is structured and how one thing becomes and leads to the next. And of course, in the storytelling is all the details, how everything that the character is motivated by, and everything they want.